in 2005, we started suing them. A lot of people were suing coal plants, but we were suing them. The water keepers were suing them on mercury. And I had 40 suits going by 2005. And I was traveling all around the country talking to crowds like this about mercury. And at almost every speech I gave, these groups of women, and they were different at every place, would come and sit in the front row before they'd show up early. And then when I finished, they'd wait and they'd ask to talk to me. And as it turns out, they were, all of them, were the mothers of intellectually disabled children. And they all believed that the vaccines had caused their child's injury, particularly mercury vaccines. And they would say to me in a very respectful but also kind of vaguely scolding way, if you're really interested in mercury exposures to children, you need to look at vaccines. I didn't want to do it. I had spent a lot of my life working on the issues of intellectual disabilities. It was part of the DNA of my family. My Aunt Eunice, who was also my godmother, started Special Olympics. I had been working in Special Olympics, which was then called Camp Shriver, since I was 8 years old. Every weekend, as a hugger, as a coach, I spent 200 hours as a teenager in high school working in Wasaic Home for the Retarded. My family, my uncle was chair of the health committee for 50 years. My family wrote a lot of the legislation that gave rights and changed the entire relationship with individuals with intellectual disabilities, the most vulnerable population in the country. But I didn't want to do that for my life. I wanted to work on fisheries, on water pollution, on energy. And so I was dodging these ladies. And then one of them came to my house, found my house on Cape Cod in the summer of 2005. She was a psychologist from Minnesota named Sarah Bridges. She had a son who got severe autism from a mercury vaccine. He had gotten a $20 million award from the vaccine court, which recognizes autism came from the vaccine. There was no controversy, and she didn't want it to happen to other children. And she showed up at my house, and she took out of the trunk of her car a stack of studies about 18 inches deep. She put it on my front stoop, then she knocked on the door. And when I came to the door, she pointed to the pile, and she said, "I'm not leaving here till you read those." And I'm accustomed to reading science. I wanted to be a scientist when I was a kid. And the kind of law that I practice involves a lot of science. So almost every suit that I brought has involved some kind of scientific controversy. And I would not be very good at my job if I didn't enjoy reading science and if I could not read it critically. And so I sat down, and I didn't read the studies, but I read the abstracts. And I got about 6 inches down on that pile. And I was just dumbstruck by this huge delta between what the public health agencies were saying the science said and what the actual peer-reviewed published science was saying. And I started after that doing what I always did when I didn't understand something. I had, because of my name and my family's relationships with these agencies, I could always get the head of an agency on a phone very quickly. And I started calling them and asking questions. I got Francis Collins from NIH and Kathleen Stratton and Marie McCormick from Institute of Medicine. And they told me something weird. I asked them about the science, and I realized they were completely not conversant with it. They were just parroting this phrase, safe and effective. They hadn't read any of the actual science. And when I asked them about details, they said, "You have to talk to Paul Offit." Well, Paul Offit is a vaccine developer who's a partner of Merck's. And, I had been working with EPA for many years, suing about probably 20% of my lawsuits were against EPA, which is a captive agency. But captive by the oil and chemical and pesticide industries. And, you know, EPA, if I call a science guy or a regulator there, they're going to have some self-respect. And they're going to try to answer my question. They're not going to direct me to a coal industry lobbyist. So this was bizarre. And then when I talked to Paul Offit, I caught him in a lie, and which I'm not going to go into. I'd love to go into, but I'm going to. I need to conserve my time here, so take my word for it. But he knew I caught him in a lie. I knew, and there was that moment where we're like, "You are just a liar," and so then I realized, okay, these guys either don't know what they're doing or they're lying about it deliberately. And then I realized these agencies were completely captured, but agency capture on steroids. FDA gets more than 50% of its budget from the pharmaceutical companies. CDC has a $12 billion budget, and $5 billion of that, so almost half, goes to buying vaccines from these companies and then distribute them. So if you work at CDC, you do not get promotions by finding problems with vaccines. You get promoted by increasing uptake. And then NIH is just an incubator for pharmaceutical products. So it develops the vaccines, hands them over to the industry, hands them over to the universities, which then get NIH money, $200, $300 million to do phase 2 and phase 1 and phase 2 trials. Then if those are successful, which they always are because they make them successful, they then call in the pharmaceutical company to do a phase 3, and then they all divide up the royalty, the patent margin rights, and then they all go, you know, then Tony Fauci, who's the head of NIH, walks it through the regulatory process at FDA and CDC, where he's picked the members of the panels who are all taking money from him. And they know their product is next in line, and their job is to rubber stamp this product and recommend it to children. So I saw this process and how it worked. And it's beyond, you know, it was regulatory capture on steroids. It was like, and then NIH gets the money. I got deplatformed for saying NIH owns half this the Moderna vaccine. They said that's vaccine misinformation. Well, guess what? On Thursday this week, Moderna made a $400 million payment to NIH for its share of the royalties to date. So, you know, all of my conspiracy theories have about a 3-month shelf life before they become reality. And